Welcome to my channel. Tonight's story will guide you into deep, peaceful sleep. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and drift with me to a quiet village where the stars shine softly, the rivers move slow, and time stands still. No worries here, just calm skies and warm winds. You are safe. You are welcome. Sleep well, dreamer. Let's begin. In a sleepy stretch of land where the sea met the sand with the gentlest hush and the moon smiled softly over the waves, there existed a quiet harbor town by the name of Clifftide, a place so distant from the cares of the world that even time seemed to tread lightly there, not rushing, not halting, just moving like a slow tide brushing the ankles of an old dock. The town was small, no larger than a pocket full of pebbles, but it held something rare, something secret and sacred, the Dream Harbor, a place where forgotten dreams washed ashore in glass bottles sealed with wax, filled with handwritten memories, soft wishes, and bits of laughter that had somehow gotten lost in the waking world. The townsfolk believed that these dream bottles were the gifts of the seabells, mysterious beings who lived just beyond the horizon, deep beneath the waves, beings who listened to the sorrows and hopes of sleepers and carried them like lullabies until they were ready to return. Most people never tried to find the seabells. They simply accepted the rhythm of their lives. Mornings filled with dew and porridge, afternoons heavy with sun and the scent of salt, and evenings where lanterns were lit, placed along the harbor, and left to flicker and swing with the wind until the stars blanketed the sky. But one man, an old lantern keeper named Emery Finn, lived differently. He had been in charge of lighting the harbor for 40 years, ever since his youth. Ever since he'd first wandered into town with no name and no past, a quiet boy found asleep on the sand with a smooth stone clutched in his hand, and only 2 words in his mouth: keep light. No one knew what it meant, but the elder of the town took it as a sign, a destiny, and gave Emery his task to light the way for dreamers, to tend to the night so that all who slept in Clifftide would be safe in their dreams. Each evening, Emery would walk the lantern path, with a long brass rod and a soft orb at the end, touching each unlit lantern with the care of someone lighting stars. His pace was slow, intentional, meditative, as if every swing of the flame brought peace into the world. And as he walked, he would hum, not loudly, but just enough for the breeze to carry it a tune no one had ever taught him, a lullaby as ancient as tides and as familiar as a mother's heartbeat. People said the sea calmed when he sang, boats rocked more gently, fish leaped playfully, and sometimes, just sometimes, a dream bottle would wash ashore right as his final lantern sparked to life. Nestled in the foam like a pearl waiting to be found, Emery always checked the beach at the end of his route. He never read the messages in the bottles. Instead, he placed them gently into the alcove beneath the harbor's bell tower, round stone building with walls lined in velvet and moonshells, where townsfolk could come in the morning to choose a dream and carry it home, like borrowing a story from the stars. Over time, the tower became a place of quiet pilgrimage. People whispered their hopes into the wind as they walked there. Children picked bottles that glowed faintly blue, hoping they held dreams of flying. Elderly couples held hands and chose bottles that shimmered green, for peace and memory and long-lost gardens. But Emery never chose a dream for himself. He only ever gave. Despite his quiet devotion, or maybe because of it, Emery was beloved by all. They brought him warm bread, shell carvings, and poems scribbled in curling ink. But he lived alone in a round cottage on the hill, with driftwood walls, a stove that sighed when lit, and windows that framed the stars like paintings. His only companion was a cat named Solace, who never meowed, only purred. Her fur, the color of storm clouds before dawn, she walked beside Emery every night, matching his steps, tail brushing against his coat like the hand of a memory. And though the town never spoke it aloud, everyone knew Emery had never aged, not truly. His hair had turned silver, yes, and his hands bore the story of time. But his eyes, those soft gray eyes, remained unchanged, clear and deep like tide pools, reflecting something ancient and kind. Whispers passed among the villagers, soft and slow like the sea fog, that Emery was once a dream himself, that he had come from the ocean, that he belonged to the seabells, but no one ever asked, Clifftide secrets were treated with respect, and silence was a form of love. One evening, when the clouds wore colors like melting apricots and the breeze smelled of honeyed mint, something unusual happened. Emery was lighting the third lantern on the western dock, humming his lullaby, when the flame flickered oddly as if it hesitated and then pulsed softly in blue. Emery paused. Lantern flames never turned blue. He touched the brass rod to the glass again, and this time the flame steadied, but the humming wind around him changed pitch, almost like it was echoing his tune back to him, but slower, more drawn out, like the sea singing in its sleep. Solace arched her back gently, blinking toward the shoreline. Emery followed her gaze and saw something shimmering near the sand. Not a bottle this time, but something taller, softer, like silk standing in the wind. He walked down the steps, boots tapping in rhythm with the tide, and as he neared the object, he saw it was a cloak silver white soaked in moonlight. Fluttering upright though, there was no stake, no pole, nothing to hold it, and there, on the hem, were embroidered dozens of tiny seabells, glowing faintly and stitched with thread so fine it looked like music. When Emery reached for it, the cloak folded itself into his arms, warm and weightless like a memory you'd forgotten until you held it again. Inside the fold was a note, written in curling symbols only he could read though he'd never learned them. It said, "When the tide forgets the moon and the flame turns blue, the keeper must walk beyond the last lantern." Emery stood still. The wind paused. Solace pressed against his leg, and then, without waiting, began walking toward the eastern cliffs, where no lanterns were lit, where no one ever went. Emery looked back at the harbor golden lights swinging gently, families settling into quiet dinners, the bell tower resting in the dusk, with the cloak over one arm. He followed the cat beyond the edge of the path, past the last lantern, into the whispering grass and beyond. The ground turned from earth to sand, from sand to mist. Strange blue flowers bloomed in the night air without stems. The stars above seemed closer, like curious eyes watching kindly, waiting. Emery did not ask questions. He only walked, the cloak humming in his arms, Solace ahead, and the world behind them falling away like pages turned softly. At the top of a slope that hadn't existed yesterday, there appeared a door not in a wall, not in a house, but just a door standing alone, made of driftwood and starlight, with no handle, only a circle in the center, shaped like a sea bell. Emery stepped forward, held out the cloak, and the sea bell threads on its hem began to glow. The door shimmered once, then opened without sound. On the other side was not a room, but a stairwell that curled down like a conch shell, lined with orbs that pulsed gently, as if breathing. He stepped inside, Solace slipping in beside him. Down they went, down into soft light, down into stillness, down into a hush so complete it made your thoughts whisper. The steps never creaked, the walls never changed, only the light, which deepened in color from silver to violet to blue to something quieter than color. The shade of peace before sleep. At the bottom of the stairs, Emery stepped into a chamber that wasn't a chamber at all. It was a reflection pool, perfectly still, showing not your face, but your truest dreams, the ones you lost as a child but never stopped needing. And in that water, Emery saw something he hadn't seen since the day he was found on the shore, a ship of glass, sails of memory, drifting across an ocean made of lullabies. Beside the pool stood three beings. They were tall, neither male nor female, clothed in sea light and echo, their eyes like the centers of seashells, spiraling, silent, kind. They bowed to Emery, one stepped forward and spoke not with words, but with feeling, with warmth that filled the chest and soothed the bones. The message was simple. You were once a dream, given form to guide the dreaming. Now, your time has come to dream again. Solace leaped gently into Emery's arms. He held her close. He closed his eyes. The cloak wrapped itself around him, warm as sunlight on closed eyelids, soft as his mother's forgotten voice. And as the lanterns of Clifftide swung in the breeze, as the bell tower chimed once in its sleep, as the sea whispered hush hush to the shore, the lantern keeper became a dream again. A blue flame burned gently in the harbor for the first time, and every villager who passed it that night felt felt a deep and peaceful sleep, filled with long-lost joy and silver ships and stars that hummed lullabies. When Emery closed his eyes in the chamber of dreams and felt the warm light of the cloak wrap itself around him, he expected silence and ending of sorts, a closing of one chapter into nothingness, but what he found instead was movement, a gentle sense of floating, as though the wind had taken him into its arms and was now carrying him down, not into darkness, but into a deeper, softer kind of light, the kind you see through your eyelids just before dawn, when everything is quiet and kind and the world is still breathing softly around you. There was no sense of time passing, only the comforting awareness that everything he had ever done, the lighting of lanterns, the humming of lullabies, the gentle placing of bottles on velvet shelves, had been leading to this moment, this long exhale into the unknown, not with fear but with peace, as though he had finally remembered something he had always known, but had forgotten somewhere along the way. When Emery opened his eyes again, he found himself not standing, not walking, but floating within a sphere of warm, shimmering water, suspended like a leaf in honey, light filtering from every direction, and moving in slow waves that sang without sound. Around him swirled form shapes, made of fluid starlight and echoes, like whales carved from the sky, drifting past him with reverence, some brushing close, leaving trails of memories in their wake. He was not afraid. He did not need to breathe. The water, if that's what it was, cradled him with the gentleness of a cradle and the kindness of a childhood, not quite remembered. And in its embrace he understood he was not sinking, he was being shown. The light changed, slowly shifting from golden to pearlescent, and with it, the scene around him transformed. The forms parted, and Emery saw what lay beyond, a city beneath the waves. The city unfolded like a memory made of coral and light, towers rising like kelp fronds, buildings shaped like giant seashells, their spirals glowing from within. Floating walkways connected the domes, and orbs of pale blue light floated lazily between them, bobbing like jellyfish. The colors were soft, all hues of twilight and dream, lilac roofs, sea glass walls, paths paved in the glowing bones of stars. It was not a city made by hands, but by dreams built by the sea bells, the ancient dream weavers who, until now, had lived only in the whispers of stories told by children beneath wool blankets. Emery drifted forward, drawn not by his limbs but by the water's will, as if it were gently pushing him along, like a boat nudged by the current. As he moved through the city, he saw them, the sea bell, graceful beings shaped like wind and song, their bodies flowing like cloaks in the current, eyes glowing like moonlight in a puddle. They did not speak aloud, but he could feel their greetings as waves of kindness and recognition. They had known him, always. He had been one of them once, not in body, but in purpose, a dream given form to protect other dreams, a living lantern meant to guard the border between sleep and waking. Now he had returned home not to rest, but to learn. Emery was guided to the heart of the city, a great dome built from layered crystal and woven silk, glowing with the soft pulse of a slumbering star. Inside was not a throne, but a pool flat wide, and still, and floating above it was a single object, a lantern. But unlike the brass lanterns of this one was vast and nearly transparent, forged from glass and memory, its flame not of fire but of pure dream, spinning slowly in place, like a sun that had forgotten how to burn. Emery was placed beside it, gently lowered until his feet touched a platform made of solid starlight. And as he stood there, the lantern opened itself like a flower. Within it was a room, a small one, circular, with a single chair, a table, and a great book resting open, its pages blank and glowing faintly blue. A seabell drifted close and placed a soft hand upon his shoulder. The message came not in words, but in knowing, you are now the keeper of the deep lantern. The stories that sleep beneath the waves must be recorded. Every dream that drifts too far must be called back. Every light that flickers in the night sky begins here. And with that, the book before him began to write itself, not with ink, but with scenes blooming upon the page like petals. A girl dreaming of her grandmother's garden, an old man walking the paths of a village that never existed, a child flying through clouds shaped like whales. The book captured them all, His hand hovered above the page, and a pen appeared, weightless and ready, and without hesitation. Emery began to write. 4 days though, time meant little here, he wrote. Each dream, each hope, each lost moment was carefully recorded in looping. Glowing script that shifted color as it cooled, from silver to pearl to a soft blue that seemed to hum with quiet joy. The lantern thrummed with each finished entry, releasing small spirals of light into the water above, sending them toward the surface. These were the dreams being released back into the world where sleeping minds could catch them like snowflakes on outstretched fingers. Between writing, Emery walked the city, guided by Solace, who had become something more than a cat now, a companion of fluid grace. Her form sometimes whiskered and warm, sometimes flowing like ink through the current. She led him to places hidden, even to the seabells, forgotten gardens of glass fruit, libraries where the books whispered lullabies when opened, halls lined with mirrors that showed not reflections, but kindness you'd once given and forgotten. He did not ask why he had been chosen. He only accepted it, with the deep peace of someone who had found the place where his soul hummed at the same rhythm as the world around him. One day, if you could call it a day, Emery found himself in a chamber unlike the others. It was a dome carved entirely from a single pearl, its inside warm and iridescent, and at its center floated a single bottle mug, like the ones he used to find on Clifftide shore. But this one pulsed with a light he recognized. It was his, the dream he had lost when he first washed ashore. As he reached for it, it did not open, it melted, gently, into a mist that wrapped around his shoulders and whispered memories into his ears. A ship, long ago, caught in a storm, voices calling, a song sung beneath the deck, a child asleep in a sailor's arms. He remembered the fall, the water, the cold the hand that caught him, made not of flesh but of music and wind. The seabells had saved him, and in saving him, they had given him a task, a second life in the world above. Now that memory returned to him, not as pain, but as peace, like a song finishing its final note. From that day, Emery became more than the keeper. He became a weaver. With each dream he recorded, he could mend the broken ones, those shattered by sorrow, warped by fear, lost to the noise of waking life. He would see them first in the book, twisted scenes, frayed edges. Silent screams in with a wave of his hand and the softness of his voice. He would stitch them back together, turning nightmares into healing journeys, transforming chaos into quiet paths lit by lanterns that only appeared in sleep. He spoke gently to the dreams as he rewrote them. His words never harsh, always slow and low, like the lap of waves on a calm shore. You are safe, he would say. You are seen. You are allowed to rest. And in return, the dreams would soften, their jagged corners easing into curves, their colors warming, their winds slowing. People above, though they never saw his face, began to feel it. All across the world, troubled sleepers started waking with tears of peace. Children stopped crying in their sleep, and insomniacs began to doze while watching the stars. Emery never asked for thanks. He only lit more lanterns, and so it continued, day after timeless day, writing, mending, releasing. He sometimes watched the earth from afar, peering through the surface like a pond's skin, watching the lights of cities flicker and fade, watching the seasons turn like pages. He saw children grow into parents, and parents into elders, and yet the dreamlight remained constant, eternal. Sometimes, when a particularly powerful dream rose from below, it would surface as more than a vision. It would become inspiration, a lullaby, a painting, a sudden moment of clarity in a waking mind. These were his favorites. He called them the dreams that reached beyond sleep and into the heart of the day. He wove them with extra care, humming his lullaby as he stitched them into shape, each one a gift, a lantern without flame, a beacon made of hope.com. And far above, in the village of Clifftide, the people still walked the harbor at dusk. The lanterns still glowed, though no hand touched them now. The bottles still arrived on the shore, though no tide brought them in. The bell tower still chimed, though no one pulled the rope. They didn't question it. They knew, in the quiet way, all peaceful things are known. that Emery still watched over them, still lit the night with his presence, still wandered the shore of dreams. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right and the stars blinked a little slower, they could hear it, the old lullaby, drifting on the breeze, hummed by a voice the sea had never forgotten, within the calm blue glowing dome of the deep lantern. As dreams continued to flow gently through the pages of the great book of echoes, Emery found himself entering a new rhythm, not unlike the quiet tide cycles he once watched but deeper, more spiritual, more embedded into the fabric of existence itself. Each dream he mended seemed to whisper to the next, as though the dreams were not isolated stories, but part of a great tapestry that spanned the subconscious minds of all people who had ever lived. With each glowing line he inscribed, the pulse of the deep lantern responded with a deeper hum, and the waters around the dream city of Alindra grew clearer and more luminous, revealing hidden structures nestled far beneath the sea, spirals of silver and coral, caverns lined with bioluminescent runes, long-forgotten passageways built not by hands but by feeling, built not of stone but of sustained intention. The seabells called this hidden place the Spiral Vault, a sacred repository of dreams that had never returned. These were not nightmares, nor peaceful journeys, they were unfinished dreams, abandoned, interrupted, and lost before their purpose could unfold. They drifted in limbo, not in the human world, not quite in the dream world, tethered only by a fragile thread of memory, fragile as breath on glass. And it was now Emery's calling to descend into this vault and guide those dreamers home. The journey began not with movement, but with stillness. To reach the spiral vault, one could not simply swim or walk. One had to surrender, to rest within the deepest chamber of the dream lantern, to lie upon a bed of woven starlight beneath a cascade of liquid night, and to let oneself be pulled, not downward, but inward, into the very center of the dream itself. The seabells guided Emery with soft gestures and harmonic pulses, their luminous bodies glowing like lullabies turned visible. Solace lay curled at his side as he closed his eyes, and as his breath aligned with the rhythm of the lantern's pulse, the chamber dissolved around him. There was no falling, no floating, only a spiraling descent into warmth, as though sliding into a memory long before birth, long before time, where color had no name and silence was a friend. The first thing Emery felt was texture, not on his skin, but in his thoughts. The space around him was made of softness, like old velvet or wind through tall grass. Then came Sentinel Vendor and cedarwood, the kind that wrapped around his shoulders like his mother's shawl. And then came sound, faint, familiar, like a story half heard through a closed door. He was arriving. When his eyes opened, he stood on the threshold of the Spiral Vault, a colossal, winding structure stretching in every direction at once, its walls translucent and swirling with colorless light, each step forward echoing with a memory not his own. The vault felt alive, not in the way animals live, but in the way forests breathe or oceans think. Dreams moved here, not as whispers but as presences, some glowing faintly, some barely flickering, some tangled like vines. Emery's role was not to change them, but to understand them, to listen with more than ears, and to offer a path toward completion. The first dream that approached him was smaller, simple ball of silver thread, trembling in the air. When he reached toward it, it opened into a scene, a child standing in a forest, looking for a balloon that had floated away. The dream had paused here, frozen for years. The child, forever searching, the balloon forever just beyond reach. Emery stepped into the scene and became a whisper on the wind. "There it is," he said gently, and pointed toward a branch where the balloon had caught. The child turned, saw it, and smiled. The dream continued. The thread glowed gold, then faded peacefully. One down, thousands to go. He wandered through the vault, encountering dreams like forgotten lullabies, some sweet, some sad, some strange, beyond description. A sailor adrift in a sea of floating music notes, waiting for the melody to resolve. A baker who had been trapped in a dream where the flour never mixed. A lonely astronomer looking at a night sky with no stars. Emery did not force their endings. He merely listened, found the missing note, the quiet answer, the invisible hand. With time, the vault began to change. Light spread more evenly across its spiral corridors, and soft music began to resonate from its depths. Music born not of instruments, but of resolution, of long-held breaths, finally exhaled. As each dream found peace, it released its sound into the fabric of the vault, like threads being woven back into a forgotten quilt. Emery felt himself changing too. He was no longer only the keeper or the weaver. He was becoming something greater. The seabells called it a harbinger of completion, one who carries endings not as limits, but as gifts. One day, as Emery reached the deepest point in the vault, he found a chamber unlike any other. It was vast and utterly silent. In the center floated a single dream larger than the rest, shaped like a massive orb of dark glass, swirling with fractured images, a lighthouse standing in a blizzard, a door that never opened, a name that refused to be spoken. This dream had not moved in centuries. It was not abandoned, it was imprisoned. Emery placed his hand against the orb and felt a jolt, not pain, but recognition. This was not just his forgotten memory, but his origin. The dream he had lived before Clifftide, before the sea, before everything. It came back to him like a wave. He was the son of a dreamer and a sailor, born beneath stars that no longer shone. His family had been lost in a storm, and he had clung to a floating lantern as his father sang lullabies into the wind. That night, the seabells had found him, and in a moment of profound sorrow, they had offered him rebirth not as a human child, but as a guide between worlds. That unspoken dream, the one of being found, of being known, had never ended, until now. Emery placed both hands on the orb, and from his chest, a single note emerged, a long, deep, restful hum, the same tune he had hummed on the harbor paths of Clifftide. The dream responded. The images inside slowed, softened. The blizzard faded, the lighthouse's door opened, and a man stepped forward, arms wide, face glowing not with perfection, but with love. Emery wept not with sorrow, but with peace. He stepped into the dream one final time, embraced the father he'd never known fully, and let the light wash over him. When he returned to the vault, the orb was gone. In its place stood a new door, woven of dreamlight and memory, with a symbol carved into its arch, a lantern with wings. This was the way forward, not an end, but a continuation, a path only he could walk. The seabells greeted him as he stepped through the portal, their forms brighter now, more distinct. One placed a hand over Emery's heart, and a warm radiance flowed into him, not a gift, but a return. He had always carried it, but now he remembered. The ability to shape dreams not just for peace, but for awakening, for transformation. No longer was he only a guardian. He was now a shaper, capable of helping dreamers carry their peace into waking life. He returned to the dream lantern and found it larger, pulsing with new light. The book of echoes opened to pages that shimmered gold and silver. The ink danced as it was written. The dreams now came to him not just for rest, but for direction, for healing, for forgiveness, for courage. Some dreams asked to become poems, others asked to be planted like seeds in the minds of artists and healers. Emery obliged them all. Back on Earth, far above the waters of the town of Clifftide began to experience something beautiful. People awoke with ideas they could not explain. New lullabies, fresh recipes, tiny sculptures shaped like bells and wings. Children dreamed of oceans with glowing cities, and elders remembered lost friends who told them goodbye with smiles. The villagers gathered each dusk at the harbor and found not only bottles, but tiny feathers of light resting in the sand, each one humming softly when held. These became charms, carried in pockets or hung by windows, said to bring clarity and rest. And though no one had seen Emery in many seasons, they never forgot him. His light was everywhere, in the lamps, in the wind, in the hush of the tide. Some said they still heard his humming when the fog rolled in. Some believed he had become the seabell's favorite story. Others believed he had become a dream so powerful, he was now dreaming the village itself. As for Emery, he simply continued. There was no rush, no destination, only the soft, endless work of mending, weaving, guiding, the dream harbor, the deep lantern, the spiral vault. Each one pulsed with his presence, and each new dream that found its way Into the fold added another soft note to the melody of peace. He had become more than a man. He had become a rhythm, a keeper of all that moved slowly, gently, toward wholeness. Time, as it functioned within the dreamtide realm of Olympus, did not behave as it did in the world. Above it swirled and stretched like silk in water, folding back on itself gently, echoing like song refrains caught between layers of thought. And as Emery continued his quiet, dedicated weaving beneath the glow of the deep lantern, the rhythms of creation shifted once more, carrying him gently toward a new path, not away from his duties, but deeper into their meaning, as though every dream he had touched, every page he had inked in the book of echoes, had been leading to something greater still, a deeper peace hidden beneath the simple softness of the world he had come to know. One twilight, as he sat beneath the floating braids of star kelp in the lantern chamber, Solace, who had remained a steady companion even as her form grew more ethereal with each day, suddenly lifted her head, eyes narrowed toward a glowing thread that shimmered down from above like a trail of light, twisting as it reached the chamber floor. Emery followed its quiet pulse with his gaze, feeling the thread hum beneath his fingertips as he brushed it faint, like a breeze through an open window, and yet unmistakably real. It was an invitation, though no words accompanied it, only the feeling that something forgotten was asking, very gently, to be remembered. He rose, Solace circling his ankles, and without a word spoken, he allowed the glowing thread to guide him from the chamber, out beyond the weavings of Alindra's underwater halls, and upward, far upward, into a current of memory that did not feel like water at all, but like walking through soft air infused with sunlight and aged music. He did not swim, nor drift, but simply moved, each step dissolving behind him, as though no path needed to remain once it had been walked. The world around him grew warmer, lighter, and quieter still, until the watery resistance of the deep ocean gave way to open space, not empty, but filled with the low, golden hum of presence, of purpose. And there, at the edge of a horizon that shimmered with no defined sky or sea, stood a grove, not of coral, not of seaweed, but of tree stools, with leaves shaped like clock hands and blossoms made of faint translucent bells. Each tree swayed gently without wind, and every time a blossom touched another, a sound of memory floated into the air like fog made of thought. This was the memory orchard, the place where dreams that had become truths were planted, where the most resolved and ancient fragments of emotion took root and blossomed again and again, not to be mended or forgotten, but to be remembered softly by those who needed them most. Emery stepped beneath the first tree, and a bell brushed his shoulder immediately. He felt warmth flood his chest, and he saw it, an old woman braiding her granddaughter's hair as they sang together. Not words, but a melody of comfort, passed down through time. It vanished softly as he walked on. Another bell touched his hand, a man setting down his hammer, after building the final piece of a rocking chair for his wife, tears running down his cheeks, because it had taken him 10 years to find the courage. Another bell, a young boy standing on the edge of a lake, whispering an apology to the water for something he had broken, and being answered by a breeze that ruffled his hair in forgiveness. Emery wept softly, not from sorrow, but from the purity of it all. These were not just dreams, they were echoes of the soul, planted here because they had meant something to someone once, and because they still did. Each tree had grown from a single, powerful moment of peace, and now they rang not like alarms, but like tender chimes that swept through the orchard, like invisible hands cradling the spirit. At the center of the orchard stood a tree, unlike the others. It did not shimmer silver, it pulsed deep indigo, with blossoms so faint they looked like they were made of breath itself. This tree was older, much older, and its blossoms did not chime, they whispered. Emery drew near, and Solace leaped into one of its low branches, curling beside a bell that did not ring but glowed. Emery placed a hand on the trunk, and immediately, his breath slowed, his eyes closed, and he was drawn inward not by force, but by welcoming to a memory that was not his own, and yet felt as familiar as the sound of waves on Clifftide's shore. He saw a village not Clifftide, but older, Older still one with floating lanterns shaped like orbs, music played on glass instruments, and sky whales drifting above the rooftops. The people of this place were dreamers, not in metaphor, but in practice. They lived through intention, spoke in symbols, and fell asleep each evening to gather truths from the shared subconscious they called the field. He saw a child in that village, curious, loved, and the child wandered too far into a field one night, chasing the echo of his mother's voice. That child never returned. The village wept, and from their sorrow, they planted the first tree of memory, vowing that no dream, no person, no moment of beauty or grief would ever be forgotten again. That child's name was Emery. He gasped, eyes opening, not in shock, but in calm. He had lived many lives, it seemed, not only as the lantern keeper, not only as the drifted boy, but before time, as he understood it, as a dreamborn child of a dreamborn people. The seabells were not separate from him. They were his ancestors, his kin, and perhaps in some cosmic way, also his descendants. Time had curled around itself like a sleeping cat, and he had lived across its spirals like threads through a loom. He had not been chosen at random. He was the song, the breath, the hum, the continuation of a long echo that had never ended. And now, he was its voice again. From within the tree of memory, a new bell grew smaller than the others, shaped like a teardrop, glowing not blue or gold, but that faint, nameless color of morning before the sun breaks. It chimed once as it dropped into his palm, and as it did, a breeze swept through the orchard for the first time. From every branch, the blossoms responded not with noise, but with light, each ringing faintly in perfect harmony, like a choir of remembered peace. Above the orchard, the sky could be called a sky shifted and shimmered into a field of dancing bells, each ringing once before bursting into stardust. This was a sign. The memory orchard was ready to open again, not just to him, but to the dreamers above, to the world in waking that had forgotten how to slow, how to breathe, how to hold a single good memory for longer than a heartbeat. The seabells gathered at the orchard's edge, not in ceremony, but in support, and Emery walked toward them with the tear-shaped bell glowing in his palm. They bowed their heads and sang not aloud, but in vibration, in deep waves that resonated through the orchard, and upward through the dream currents. It was time for a new offering. In the world above, cliff tides stirred. Children who had never remembered, their dreams began waking with poems on their tongues. Elders who had once forgotten their own names, now smiled at songs from their childhoods. A hush came over the harbor each night, not of silence, but of reverence, of readiness. And one morning, the bell tower released not one, but 300 bottles, each holding not dreams this time, but memories, real ones, long lost, returned like gifts from the tide. People cried, laughed, embraced. They remembered themselves in ways they had thought impossible. And all the while, Emery watched, gently ringing the bell in his palm once a night, each chime releasing another wave of gentle recollection across the land. These were not memories to weigh people down. They were the kind that made people feel anchored, like warm hands on the back, like names whispered kindly in dreams. Back in Alindra, the dream lantern expanded once more. New chambers appeared, ones filled not with books, but with gardens, starlit rivers, and floating platforms where people could visit and sleep, resting not just to escape but to restore. Emery became a guide not only of the forgotten and the unfinished, but of the healing. He would sit by the gardens and wait for visitors, dreamers wandering into the dream harbor, unsure of why they had come. He would offer them tea made of dream root and silence. He would walk with them among the glowing willows and ask no questions. And always, when they were ready to speak, it would not be stories of fear or struggle, but of tiny joys, a lost scent, a remembered voice, a moment that once made their hearts still. These were the true treasures. These were what the memory orchard had shown him, and now he would help them plant their own. It was not long after the memory orchard bloomed that the dream lantern began to stir with a new rhythm, a quieter beat beneath its usual pulse, like a second heartbeat, gently forming beneath the first, a lull within a lull, a a silence even more sacred than the dream itself. And though Emery did not know its meaning at first, he felt it through the soles of his feet and the center of his chest as he walked. Each morning along the starlit bridges of the city now blooming with light and memory at every turn. The seabells, too, had changed. They no longer hovered in silent observation, but moved with intention, slowly, gently guiding dreamers as they drifted unknowingly into the deeper realms of rest. And the dreamers themselves were different, no longer just visitors passing through with images flickering like fireflies, but now participants, conscious in some small, shimmering way. It was as if the boundary between waking and sleeping had thinned, softened like parchment damp with dew, and across that veil, more and more souls had begun to arrive by way of the deep lantern. They came not as spirits or visions, but as dreaming selves, children curled inside clouds, elders floating in bubbles of memory, artists surrounded by shifting sketches and unplayed music, and wanderers, always wanderers, who stepped lightly as though that the land beneath their feet was spun from dreams. Emery, now more luminous than before, greeted each visitor with the same patient grace. He had once offered the lanterns of and began leading them one by one down the path of lanterns, a new corridor that had opened near the edge of the spiral vault, lined with small glowing lights that floated just above the ground like fireflies captured in honeyed glass. The path itself stretched endlessly in both directions, yet always brought its walker exactly where they needed to go. No two journeys were ever the same. For some, the lanterns glowed silver and led them to places of rest, gardens of forgotten lullabies, fields of tall feather grass that whispered their names back to them like old friends. For others, the lanterns burned gold and guided them through the echoes of their pasts, not to relive pain, but to witness it gently, held safely, like a child shown a picture of a storm they no longer fear. Emery never spoke much during these walks. He did not need to. The lanterns, as they drifted ahead of each dreamer, told the stories in light, flickers of old homes, smiles now gone, hands once held, words once spoken but never fully heard. And as each dreamer followed the light, the path behind them softly disappeared, not lost, but integrated, woven back into the fabric of their resting, mind like threads pulled into a newly mended quilt. Occasionally, a visitor would stop and look back, hesitant, afraid to step forward into the unknown. In these moments, Emery would kneel beside them, his voice lower than a whisper, but warmer than firelight, and say, "There is no path but yours, and no wrong way to walk it." And when he said this, the next lantern always grew a little brighter, and the dreamer would take the step, not in bravery, but in trust. One evening, as the quiet sky of Alindra shifted into its lilac phase, when the dreams above the lantern hummed in softer harmonies and the memory blossoms folded inwards for rest, a dreamer arrived who did not walk the path immediately. She stood at the edge of it, tall and still, with a crown of stars circling her head and a long braid made of wind. Her name, when Emery gently asked, was Kala, and she had been drifting between dreams for many lifetimes, never fully resting, never fully waking. She had seen the outer layers of but had never dared approach the deep lantern until now. "I am tired," she said simply, not with sorrow, but with the worn softness of a soul who had carried too many other people's dreams before ever understanding her own. Emery offered her a seat beneath the dream shade tree, a tall, glowing structure that grew from the side of the path and offered silence, rather than shadow. And there, beneath its cascading leaves of silver hush, she told her story of how she had spent lifetimes helping others find peace, walking through their dreams, healing their fears, always moving, always invisible, never asked if she, too, needed a place to rest. "I thought I was only a mirror," she whispered, "not something that needed light." Emery listened, and as she spoke, the path behind her began to shimmer, not with the lanterns that marked a journey ahead, but with ones that glowed from within her, long dimmed lights that now flickered back to life, each one a moment she had offered peace to another. "Then you already know the way," Emery said. "You just forgot it was yours." Kala's walk down the path was unlike any other. As she stepped forward, her lantern stood pieces of herself reassembled, not changed, not broken, but returned, laughter she thought she had given away, stories she thought she had only told for others. And when she reached the end of her walk, a platform appeared floating above the gardens of Ilindran there. In that place of stillness, a new lantern lit for her, one made not of glass or dream, but of her own restored heart. You are not only a mirror, Emery told her, as she sat within her new resting place. You are the flame. And with that, Kala became the first of a new kind of dream, Gouda companion light, a dreamer who had remembered herself so deeply that her rest became a beacon for others. Slowly, more came, more who had given too much, too long, more who had waited at the edge of the path of lanterns. And for each, Emery walked beside them, until they no longer needed to be led. In time, the path itself began to sing not in words, but in gentle music, like strings plucked in stardust, notes left behind by every dreamer who had ever walked its length. Dreamers above, in the waking world, began waking with feelings they could not explain. The sudden urge to pause during the day and feel the sun on their face, to write a letter they'd delayed for years, to call someone and just listen to their voice. These small acts were eco-circles from the path of lanterns, now touching even those who had never seen a lantern. Emery would sit sometimes at the threshold of the path and watch as the dreamlight flared, signaling another arrival. He never tired, never grew weary. His presence had become more than form. It was rhythm, memory, and rest made real, solace always at his side, her soft purring harmonizing with the lights that drifted past. But one evening, something new occurred. A child arrived, not unusual, but this one was awake. Her eyes were open, clear, and curious. She touched the lantern nearest to her and laughed, not out of joy, but recognition. I know this, she said. This is my dream from yesterday. It came back. Emery kneeled, gently placing a hand near hers. What is your name, little one? He asked. She smiled and whispered, my name is Lucy, and I think I'm not really asleep. I just closed my eyes and wished really hard to see where the dreams go. Emery blinked once, slowly. This child had chosen to step into a lindernaut in sleep, but in stillness. She had entered through intention. That had not happened in centuries, and yet here she was, barefoot and glowing slightly, already touching the lanterns like they were old toys rediscovered. Will you walk the path? Emery asked. Lucy looked down at her braids swaying, and then shook her head. No, I don't need to walk it yet, but I want to leave something behind. She held out her hand, and a tiny light blinked into Bingya's new lantern, no bigger than an acorn. This is for someone who's afraid to start. She set it on the path's edge and smiled. You'll know who needs it. And with that, Lucy yawned, blinked once more and was gone, her place marked by a soft curl of starlight that lingered for hours after. That night, Emery held the acorn lantern in both palms, cradling it gently. It flickered not with fire, but with trust. And in that moment, he realized what the path of lanterns truly was, not just a passage through dreams, but a bridge between states of being, sleep and wake, memory and imagination, silence and song. He placed Lucy's gift into the path, and before long, it pulsed one's end. Someone far away, someone long waiting, began their walk at last. In the heart of Ilindran, beneath the gardens of restored memory and the silver archways of the dream lantern, Emery sat quietly by the great reflecting pool that had once shown him glimpses of forgotten dreams. His legs folded beneath him, his hands resting gently in his lap, and his eyes half closed, as if listening not to the world around him, but to something deeper, something woven into the soft pulse of the realm itself. The path of lanterns hummed in the distance, its new dreamers quietly arriving, guided by lights that now came from a dozen sources, not just Emery, not just the sea bells, but from the dream guides he had helped awaken, Kala and her companions. Lucy's gift, the shimmering companion lights that circled the realm like friendly stars. Ilindran no longer needed him to hold every thread. The stories were writing themselves now, each dreamer finding their place, each memory being planted or restored with the same kind of patience that once lived only in him. Solace, older now, or perhaps simply more radiant. rested by his side, her purring soft and even, her form nearly translucent, as if made from the same fabric as the sky. She too had served long and faithfully, and the two of them sat in stillness, like the final two notes of a long lullaby played beneath a sky, where the stars now blinked in gratitude rather than need. The seabells gathered nearby did not speak. They stood in quiet reverence, understanding without words that something long coming had finally arrived, not an ending, but a return. They had watched Emery guide thousands of dreamers, rewrite hundreds of tangled stories, and light more lanterns than there were leaves in the orchard. His touch was in every corner of now, in the glint of water beside the spiral vault, in the music that flowed from the open sky, in the flickering lanterns that now lit themselves, and most of all, he had become part of the rhythm, no longer a lantern keeper or a weaver or even a harbinger. He had become the light itself, the pulse beneath the dream, the breath that helped others remember their own. And it was in this stillness, this gentle awareness, that Emery received his final invitation, not from a thread of light or a blooming bell, but from within himself, the call to rest, not just for a while, but completely, fully. Like the last echo of a song returning to silence, he felt it not as sadness, but as completion. He had never longed for glory or endings or words carved into stone. He had only ever wanted to light the way. With slow, deliberate hands, Emery reached into the folds of his robe and withdrew the original lantern, the one he had carried along Clifftide's harbor for so many years. Its brass now dulled, its glass warm from all it had seen. The flame inside was small now, not dim, but gentle, as if ready to sleep. He placed it beside the reflecting pool and whispered his lullaby one. Last time, no longer a song of duty or guidance, but of thanks. Thanks to the sea for carrying him, thanks to the wind for hearing him, thanks to the dreamers for trusting him, and thanks to the silence for keeping him safe in the space between breaths. As his voice faded, the lantern's flame flickered once, then twice, and finally rose into the air, not extinguished, but released. It rose like a slow comet into the sky above where the dream constellations waited, and when it reached the highest point, it burst not with sound or fire, but with peace, releasing a wave of golden hush across the realm. Every lantern along the path flared in soft reply. Every tree in the orchard rang its memory bells in perfect harmony. The reflecting pool shimmered with scenes of Emery's kindness, not as a timeline, but as a feeling. A calm settled over Alindra that had no need for explanation, and in the silence that followed, Emery closed his eyes and exhaled fully, peacefully, and faded, not away, but into the light he had always been. His body did not fall, his shape did not vanish. He became presence, the hush between words, the warmth in a well-lit room, the safety that fills a child's chest when the night no longer frightens them. He became everywhere, and the dreamers who came after never knew him by name, but they felt him in the way the path always began, just when they were ready, in the way the lanterns always glowed with the color they needed most, in the way the silence of Alindra made them feel not alone, but heard. Solace remained for a time, curled by the reflecting pool, keeping a quiet vigil in case anyone arrived too soon or needed a hand to hold. The seabells planted a tree where Emery had sat, one unlike any before it. Its bark was the color of old pages, its leaves shaped like lantern flames, and each blossom glowed faintly with the memory of someone he had helped. Dreamers began gathering beneath it without knowing why, simply drawn by the comfort it gave. Some came with questions, others with songs. A few simply sat and watched the light through its branches until sleep found them. This tree became known as the last flame, and those who rested beneath it always woke lighter, clearer, as if something very old inside them had finally smiled. Far above, in the world of waking, Clifftide entered a new age of dreams. Children painted lanterns in bright colors and hung them above their beds. Artists who had never remembered their sleep began creating music that made people weep and feel safe at the same time. Old couples sat together on the docks at night, holding hands and saying nothing, knowing they were already in the presence of the dream. And still, the tide brought bottles, not as many perhaps, and no longer with People didn't know where the bottles came from, but they didn't need to. They just smiled and placed them into the bell tower, where they sang in the sunlight. And so the dream harbor endured, not because one man held it together, but because one man had loved it enough to show others how. Emery had not built a Lindra, he had remembered it, and by remembering, he helped the world do the same, slowly, softly, as dreams always do. Now, when someone closes their eyes and finds themselves walking along a path lit by floating lights, with no fear, only gentle wonder, they are walking in his light. When a tired soul drifts towards sleep and hears a faint lullaby in the hum of the air, they are hearing his voice.